Hello and happy Friday, and thanks for tuning in to RadioFreeRhinecliff.org and the show in particular, Correct Me If I'm Norm. I'm your host, Norman. Thrilled, so thrilled and honored even to be here tonight with Rhinecliff's own Joan Juliet Buck. Hello, Joan. Thank you. I really am honored. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm thrilled to finally be on your show.
Well, we've been trying to make it happen. Finally, Matt orchestrated this meeting, and thanks. So let's just start with Radio Free Rhinecliff, because you have a podcast.
I've got the 8 o'clock slot for my serial tales. I started when Matt and Patricia explained that they were starting off Radio Free Rhinecliff. I said, what a great opportunity to tell a story every week and to improvise a story every week. And the thing is, if you're going to improvise every week, it's better if you're telling the same story, because otherwise you have to improvise all these new characters.
Right.
So I did one 8-chapter story, and then I did another 43-chapter story that's still not quite finished, called The Serial Tales of Little Bird.
And the 8th chapter was The Companion Fog.
The first one was yes.
And people can hear that on RadioFreeRhinecliff.org. Just click on the link for shows, and down there's a Joan Juliet Buck, or what's it called? The Serial Tales? Okay.
But, I mean, Radio Free Rhinecliff has changed Rhinecliff. It's given it a center. It's given us all a reason, kind of a reason to exist, you know.
Right.
Another reason to get out of bed in the morning.
And how long have you been in Rhinecliff?
I rented a tiny place here when I was finishing my memoir
in
2013, just so I wouldn't be in the city. And 3 years later, I sold my place in the city, came up here. But it was 2016, so somebody had just been elected, so I thought I might not buy. And Matt Rosenberg and I had a talk in the street about what the next, what the coming years were going to be like.
Right.
And so I didn't buy, but I'm still here.
Well, good. That's wonderful. And that talk in the street, were you pretty accurate at predicting what the coming years were going to be?
Matt was 100% accurate, because I said, it's like being in mourning.
Right.
And Matt said, no, when you're in mourning, what's happened is in the past. This is coming.
Right.
Do you remember that?
And there's a name for that. I think it's called fear. Future-based mourning. Yeah, I remember the day after that election, one of my daughters said, I'm really afraid.
Yeah.
Which is just gives me tingles. I was so sad. And of course, lots of that fear sort of have come to pass. Are you, in general, a very politically active person?
I've got certain things I'm obsessed about. I was one of the people who organized the anti-nuclear rally in New York City on June 12th, 1982, which came into being because Haig had said that nuclear war could be confined to Europe.
Right.
And by the following Sunday, the churches, all the pastors had convened people to start this march, and we did it. Didn't make any difference, or maybe it did. Do you know what? I've been passionate about anti-nuclear things, which is why I'm so interested in Oppenheimer.
Oh, well, and have you seen that movie?
Of course I've seen it, because what is happening now is that the serial tales are sort of slightly back burner. They're still going on, but that's a side story.
That's your ongoing story on the podcast. Right?
However, I realized sometime in the late winter, when my husband and I were desperately looking for things to watch in between all the streaming stuff, and we didn't know what was what. We had lists from friends, and I thought, no, this doesn't make any sense. We don't have art pages that we look at anymore. What I should do, I used to be a movie critic and a TV critic. I should actually do things to help the community, watch stuff, start reviewing again, and tell people what I think of things, which may help them, guide them in their choices.
Right. And will those things be mostly movies or sort of all kinds of stuff?
It's starting with movies and things that you watch, because I'm kind of music blind, so I couldn't possibly,
music blind.
Yeah, I can't really tell one song from another. unless it's had a tremendous emotional impact, say when I was heartbroken.
Right.
Cat Stevens, I know all about.
That's funny. So did you watch Oppenheimer twice?
Yes, I went to see Oppenheimer twice because I didn't understand a lot of what they showed first time around because of this I've read about in the review that you'll be hearing very soon. There's a thing with the way they record sound these days. It sounds like people are practicing Portuguese with a mouthful of spaghetti.
What the heck? Why would that be?
Very precise sound in the same way that very precise HD cameras show exactly when the actor had acne and for how long and what they did about it. Very precise sound attaches itself, records the click of saliva.
Oh boy, I hate that.
And it doesn't kind of smooth it out into something that, allows you to know the story. It gives you inside the mouth stuff.
That's real. I hadn't thought of that. That makes perfect sense. Do you think also people don't enunciate as well as they used to?
They don't bother.
I mean, there used to be this mid-Atlantic accent.
Absolutely.
Like everybody. And it was so perfect. And
you hear it particularly like if you see Anne Harding in those movies from the 30s. And Anne Harding was a crisp blonde. And every word she spoke, because everyone talked a little bit like they were somewhere, as you say, mid-Atlantic, but they were somewhere between Shropshire and Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah, exactly.
And they all sounded terribly rich, and they were absolutely intelligible.
Right. Yeah. It's so nice to watch those old movies and hear that. Cary Grant was the one I think of for that.
Absolutely.
And the enunciation. So you've got this show, and is it on now? When's it going to go on? 8 p.m. tonight?
It's about to go up. It's in the hands of Matt Rosenberg.
And will that be on tonight?
No, it'll be on in a couple of days. And it's called, it's been named by Carrie Truman, Joan of Arc.
Joan of Arc. A lovely name.
Joan of Arc had visions that told her how to save her country. Joan of Arc watches other people's visions to tell you what to avoid.
Okay.
And to save you from being maybe bored or wasting $6.99 or $19.99.
And so will you deal with a couple of different pieces, a couple of different movies, I'm guessing, each episode?
Yeah, pretty much about 2. It's 2 this time because how lucky am I that it begins with Oppenheimer and Barbie, the 2 largest films of this year.
Yeah, Barbenheimer.
Barbenheimer, as everybody says.
So what a treat. So you saw Barbie.
Yeah, of course.
A couple of times?
I only had to see Barbie once because everyone enunciates.
Yeah.
Greta Gerwig is a brilliant director. You can understand every word that Margot Robbie says.
I like the way you're hitting your T's there, Greta Gerwig. Well, so how'd you like Barbie? I mean, is it given it away to have you talk about this a little bit now?
It's just a tiny bit. The one point I want to make now is that you think these are these 2 very, very different movies. One is Pink, and it's about a doll, and it's directed by a woman. And the other one is Gray, and it's directed by Christopher Nolan, and it's about the father of the atom bomb. But basically what joins these 2 movies is they're both about death. Because Barbie wakes up with obsessive thoughts about death.
Right.
And of course, Oppenheimer said, I have become death, the destroyer of worlds. So they both up the game. These films are not mild.
Right.
Barbie is, one of the best things in Barbie is Ken is pining for Barbie, and Barbie could really care less. And there's a moment when Ken brings out his full seduction technique, and he says, I'll play the guitar at you. And the entire audience in Brooklyn went bananas.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
That's good. So have you chosen what the next couple of movies will be?
There's a few films that I've seen that I have liked very much, like 3,000 Years of Longing.
Right. I saw that.
Did you like it?
I did. It was lovely.
Weren't you surprised?
I was totally surprised. It was it was so beautiful in the story and sort of like the magical nature of it. I was not really expecting, but but I try not to know anything about films. If I think I need to go see it, I won't watch previews or listen to people.
Exactly. I haven't read anyone's reviews of Barbie or Oppenheimer.
Right.
And when I was the movie critic for Vogue,
right,
I would go
for a number of years, right?
Yeah. And I would go to the screenings at 729 7th Avenue at 6 p.m. or 8 p.m. or both. And we sad little critics who had crawled out of our places to come to 729 7th Avenue, would sit there with our little notebooks and our very fat felt tip pens, because the only way to make notes in the dark is to have a fat felt tip pen. Because if you're trying to write with a ballpoint, you can't see what you've done and you're going to write over what you already wrote.
Right.
Right. Anyway, so we'd sit there kind of like awful insects in the dark, not talking. And if the film was really bad, the PR was always waiting outside for your opinion. If the film was really bad, there was only one thing to do. You had to fall asleep because you couldn't run away.
Oh, geez. So do you still take a large pad, I'm guessing, and a big, thick felt?
Very thick felt. Bravo or Pentel sign pen in black.
And like big pieces of paper? Or?
Well, no, you want something with a hard back.
Okay.
Because you want to be able to hold it in different, and to also angle it towards the light coming from the screen.
So I'm guessing you don't have popcorn because your hands are busy and other things.
At screenings, you never had popcorn.
And what was it, 727 7th Avenue?
729
okay.
7th Avenue.
All right, what was
there?
There
were two. There was 729 7th and there was Magno. And then if it was fancy, you went to Sony, which was in a postmodern building on Madison. And you felt so grand because there was all this marble and the elevators had marble in them. And you went up there, but they never fed you.
But was it a special screening room for movie critics and
No, it was
industry people?
It was the screening room, but it only had like a few critics in it, the monthly critics.
Okay.
And one of my monthly colleagues was Ben Brantley, who later became the number one theater critic for the New York Times. And he and I would be just these two miserable little scribblers. And some films, of course, when a film was great, it was fantastic. But then often it would be, I remember Free Willy really pissed me off. It was about an orca, a captive orca.
It's a kid's movie, right?
Yeah, but for some reason I had to be there. And I think the nap was long in coming, and every time I opened my eyes, there was that fucking orca.
And so some of them were nappertunities, these movies.
Yeah. But then also you didn't, then I went on the New York Film Festival Selection Committee, where we had to see about 800 films a year. And that would start quite slowly at the beginning of the year, but the festival was in the fall. And in the summer, we would have these intensive sessions of catching up, of watching 8 films a day in the Walter Reed Theater, 5 of us. That was the collection.
My goodness.
Yeah, the committee.
That sounds like such a job. And
I guess it was
your job.
And it was really funny because we'd meet there at 8 in the morning and it would be August, New York City. So the air conditioning would be going full blast. And our treat was that we could help ourselves to whatever we wanted from the concession stand. And after the first day, I started bringing blankets because it was too cold.
Right.
And we would just watch and watch and watch.
And what was your poison at the concession stand? What did you like to have?
Raisinets.
Right.
Yeah, because there was nobody making popcorn.
Right.
And it was Wendy Keyes, Richard Pena, Stuart Klawans, David Anson, who was in Newsweek.
And this is the cabal of critics who you saw all the time.
5 of us.
Oh, on the selection committee.
Yeah.
And how long did you do that for?
I didn't do it for long enough because what happened was very quickly I was given the job. I was offered the editorship of French Vogue. And it was really difficult because I was having such fun choosing movies for the New York Film Festival.
Right.
I didn't really want to go to Paris and look at fashion shows. And when I went to Paris and had to look at fashion shows, I was really pissed because when you are a critic going to a movie, it starts on time. And when you go to a fashion show, it can be an hour and a half late.
I
And you're
would
sitting
not
there
be
in the
happy.
front row like an idiot with
Right.
a smile on your face.
Right. Just trying to keep having that smile because people are taking your picture
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
Trying to look interested and
Yes.
present. And
they're looking at your shoes.
so what a crazy shift from being a film critic to being the editor, the first, probably the only American editor of French Vogue. Has there been
Technically,
somebody
although there
since
was
then?
a guy called Magnusson who was an interim editor in 1932, but he went on to be a great fashion designer who actually dressed the Duchess of Windsor when she married the
Wow.
king. Yeah.
Wow.
Magnusson, he was called. But anyway, so the story is I'm the only American.
Right. But what a crazy change of pace.
Yeah, it was.
From New York to Paris.
Yes.
And what was your relationship to fashion prior to getting that job?
I'd been a fashion assistant on Glamour when I was 19.
Okay. On Glamour magazine.
Glamour magazine here in New York.
Okay.
And then in Paris, I worked for a fashion photographer called Guy Bourdin, who became very famous for staging photos that looked as if the models had just been murdered. This was a big deal in the 70s. Yeah.
So an editorial photographer, no.
He did ads. He
Did
did
he?
ads for a shoe company called Charles Jourdan with these girls with blood. And I specialized for him. I was obsessed with this taxidermy shop in Paris.
Oh, yeah.
So I was always putting...
Was there a day roll or
Yes, it was Desrolles.
something like that? Yeah.
You've lived in Paris.
I've been there. Wonderful. But that shop I've been to a dozen times.
It's fantastic,
Yeah.
right? Well, imagine being able to buy as many dead birds as you want and sew them onto hats.
Right.
Yeah.
Dead birds and insects and, taxidermy, everything.
Yeah, but I never put an insect on a hat because it wouldn't really register in the photo.
I see.
Or I'd have had to put too many on.
So you picked up in New York City. You moved to Paris.
I did. I gave my cats away
Oh,
because I figured the cats would not like living in a hotel for 6 months.
right.
And, I'd be apologizing to them when I came home at 11 at night.
Right. And you have a beautiful thing that you did for, what is it, The Moth, about finding an apartment in Paris. Can you tell me about that? I've got questions.
So I spent part of my childhood in Ireland, so technically I do believe in ghosts, but I had never run across a ghost. I had pretended to be a ghost a lot of times.
Right.
Basically the sheet and the screams and knocking on pieces of furniture. But in this very beautiful 18th century apartment that I rented in Paris, curiously, for this beautiful 18th century apartment with 4 gigantic rooms on the Rue Jacob, the best street in Paris, it cost the same as my kind of pretty crappy 2-bedroom on East 77th Street. And I thought that was a little weird. And one night I awoke to feel very sweet hands brushing the hair away from my forehead. And I decided this is a dream. And I opened my eyes and I could still feel the hands. And then I turned on the light, and of course I didn't see anything. And it went on for months because I was taking my job very seriously, and I didn't want to tell anyone that I thought I had a ghost because I figured it would show weakness.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is a solid thought.
It's a solid thought.
Yeah.
Like I'm mad, right?
Sure.
So finally, after many events that I tell in The Moth and that I tell in my memoir, I moved out, and people had come. I'd given very many parties in this place, and the lawyers who rented it to me had said, "Oh, you're going to give parties. Can you make sure that the more corpulent guests keep to the perimeter of the room?"
How big was the room?
Oh, the room was huge. I don't know. The room was like 20 feet by 20
And was
feet.
it sagging already?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hilarious.
So it was, but anyway,
Corpulent.
a lot of people in fashion knew about this apartment, and this guy called Eric Wright, who worked for Karl Lagerfeld, begged me, please, can I take over your apartment? And I couldn't answer. And he said, is there anyone there now? And I couldn't answer because that person feeling my forehead every night. I mean, also I was lonely. It was company. There was this.
So But it must have been a little bit terrifying as well.
Well, it was scarier to go into the office in the morning, frankly.
Yeah. And did anybody associated with that, the lawyers or the people upstairs, sort of hint that it might be haunted?
It was an extraordinary apartment because it was built. The apartment above it was identical. They had been built for visiting cardinals from Rome who were coming to the Abbaye de Saint-Germain. So I went upstairs to see the owners, and I'm making small talk, but I'm trying to find out if they've ever felt anything in the middle of the night. And I say, well, when you're in your bedroom in the middle of the night, I said, oh, we never sleep in the bedroom. We sleep in the dining room. So that was kind of a hint that side of the apartment was perhaps on various floors.
Just one side of it.
Yeah.
So you moved out eventually.
So I moved out. And what happened, a couple of years later, I run into this guy, Eric Wright, in Milan. And I said, Eric, I never see you in Paris anymore. And he said, oh, honey, I don't sleep in Paris anymore. I sleep in London. I sleep in Rome. I'll sleep at the airport. Our apartment, it is so haunted.
This is the guy who had moved into your old place.
Yes.
And you couldn't tell him when he was moving in because you didn't want people to think.
Well, I did the things that any kind of person from Woodstock might do. I called in a Russian exorcist. I had some Tibetan exorcists work on it. I did a lot of stuff with sage. And I kept thinking, this is going to work.
You're going to exorcise these demons.
Yeah, and I also thought maybe it's not happening.
Right.
Because our whole relationship with the potential other side, it's like the hearings in Congress right now about UFOs. Is it or isn't it?
Right.
What?
But it was a time in your life you must have felt a lot of stress.
Oh, I felt enormous amount of stress.
A lot of pressure to perform.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a massive job to go from reviewing films to like being at the helm of this esteemed fashion magazine in freaking Paris. So did you think at the time, like, oh, maybe it's just the stress coming out in this way?
No, what was interesting was that at first, so I moved in there in October, full stress, and I went away in February for a week. I went and had a holiday, and it was the first time I had been unstressed. And I come back from holiday, and that's the night that somebody starts touching my forehead. Oh, boy. So the whole time I was under stress, nothing happened.
Right. Isn't that funny?
So, do you have any ghosts in your life? No?
I do not. I do not. I don't believe, but neither do I say, no, they don't exist. And I tell all the kids that. But my friend Vito said the best thing about that. He said, I would love to see a ghost because then you'd know. You would know. And as I guess you know, that there's something beyond this mortal coil.
Yeah. Yeah, well, if you listen to the serial tales, it's all about that stuff.
Yeah.
There was a night in June of that year when, again, I'd been away for the weekend. I came back. The electricity had been shut off because I'd forgotten to pay it. And I was having dinner with some Italian friends, and I told them about the ghost. And they said, wait, you're going back to this apartment that you think has a ghost in it and you have no electricity? Come and spend the night at our place.
Right.
I said, sure, just I need to get some clothes. So they came back to my place. The husband stayed in the living room. The wife said, I want to see this ghost. And I walked down the corridor carrying 2 votive candles. And as we come into the bedroom, she says, okay, let's look at this ghost. And I turn towards the bed, and there's an indentation on the bed cover. And the wife says, I think I'll go back to the living room.
Yeah. And so you felt this presence.
Yeah.
Have you ever actually seen a ghost?
No, I don't think so.
Have you had experiences since then?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's good. And have many of them found their way into your podcast, the Serial Tales?
Well, the Serial Tales, the idea about the Serial Tales, when I first moved here, there was... I noticed there were a lot of astrologers and shamans around.
Right.
A sort of disproportionate amount of them. And so rather than write a fake real thing about Rhinecliff as Littleburg and risk pissing off...
Littleburg, that's the name of the town in your stories, right?
Yeah. Risk pissing off everyone here.
Right.
I decided to amp up the supernatural angle of this place. and have it be full of shamans, channelers, witches.
Right.
But the thing is, because I was improvising a chapter every week, I was having an incredibly good time. But I kept doing that thing that you call jumping the shark.
Yeah.
I mean, I had Jesus come and be born here, the second coming, but then half the people of Littleburg didn't believe it was true.
Right. Love that. I love that so much. I did not realize they were improvised.
I would sit down to write on Tuesday for something that I would record on Wednesday or Thursday.
Right.
But I didn't have a plan.
And this is the thing. You've done so many different things, but you've been a writer throughout almost all of that. When did you develop your style or a fascination or desire to an enjoyment of putting pen to page?
I suppose, it's always been fun.
Yeah, there you go.
And it's always been fun making things up and trying to describe things.
Right.
I mean, I remember an essay when I was like 10, maybe 12, describe a walk you go on a day when you're happy and the same walk on a day when you're not. I thought, this is so exciting. Because it's completely different.
Yeah. And so do you have a great visual memory?
Yeah, that's about what I have.
Oh, what do you mean that's about what you
I have
had?
no auditory memory. I remember what people say because I usually write it down.
Okay.
I've kept diaries forever.
But you remember the details of the world
see
around
stuff.
you.
I'm much more likely to remember the fact that you have the earphones there, whatever you call them, and there's a yellow sticky thing that says 2 on it. And
Right.
it's next to an orange Stabilo marker.
Amazing. Will an image like that pop into your head later, just out of nowhere?
Yeah.
So describing things that you see rely a lot on its nouns and adjectives, basically. And one of the things I read about you is when you took over French Vogue, you said no adjectives.
Well, I took them out because, the thing about copy in a fashion magazine, first of all, let us talk about a dead art form. The fashion magazine, I was trained at the best one, which was British Vogue, that treated its readers like adults and human beings. French Vogue treated its readers like they were jerks, and you had sentences that would say, shoes make themselves lively for spring. And it was like, no, shoes don't give a shit, And the use of adjectives, it's kind of like putting too much butter on the bread.
Butter.
Well, we love butter.
Yeah. No, but I know what you mean.
But it just too much. And there was a lot of contempt for the reader. Like, oh, this is a stupid person reading a fashion magazine. And my point was, we're doing this magazine for us. What interests you? What interests you? What interests you? And, the girl who wanted to interview James Dyson, who'd invented this bagless vacuum cleaner,
Right.
she thought he was hot. I said, go.
But
Great.
what interests you, the you being your
Everybody I was
confreres at
working with.
Right.
Everybody, from like the big editors to the interns.
Right. And so that sounds great already. So you started soliciting more opinions around, I love that question, what interests you?
I mean, so they always had a special issue at Christmas.
Okay.
And they'd had guest editors since 1969. They'd started with Françoise Sagan.
That sounds fun.
And they'd had all these famous people. And then there was this kind of escalation where the last 2 guest editors were Nelson Mandela and the Dalai Lama. You can't top that. I mean, plus it's a fucking fashion magazine. So I said, okay, let's go back to basics. Everybody in this room is talented enough to do Vogue. We don't need to bring in Nelson Mandela to tell us how to do Vogue. So we're going to do special issues on themes. And I brought what I knew. First issue, 100 Years of Cinema. And so we did extraordinary things. The great photographer Brigitte Lacombe photographed Isabelle Adjani in long shot and for the first close-up, We had a thing about Méliès. We had a text by Maxim Gorky, who went to the showing of the first film by the Méliès brothers. Do I mean the Méliès brothers? Méliès is the man on the moon.
Right. Is it Méliès?
No, Lumière. The Lumière brothers.
Okay.
Was shown at an agricultural convention in Nizhny Novgorod in 1896. Try and imagine this. There are serfs. There are guys in big, smelly, weird, woolly, vests and hats and stuff. And there's Maxim Gorky. And they are seeing on a screen the arrival of a train. And Maxim Gorky writes this text that says, "Yesterday I visited the kingdom of shadows. There is no noise in this kingdom of shadows. Everything appears dead, but it's alive." And how glorious to be able to share that with the readers.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
So you share this sentence with such relish.
Yeah.
When did you first lay into reading and sentences? Be like, oh my God, that sentence is so good. When did you first really develop?
Well, because my parents moved to Paris when I was a baby, and I learned French before I learned English, and I couldn't read or write English when we moved on to London. We were in France for 5 years. Dad couldn't learn French, so we had to move to London.
Your dad couldn't learn French.
No, it was too difficult.
And let me just back up. They'd moved from L.A. to Paris to sort of escape the...
They weren't famous enough to be communists, and they actually weren't communist enough to be communists.
Okay.
But there was a very bad atmosphere in Hollywood during the House Un-American Activities Committee.
Right.
And so these endlessly recombining groups of people who made movies were suddenly full of the betrayers and the betrayed. And people would get things like letters that contained used toilet paper. I mean, that was the atmosphere during the witch hunt. And my mother went to Europe one summer when I was 2, and she came back after 3.5 months away, and she said to my father, "We don't have to take this shit anymore. We're going to Europe. There's a beautiful world out there."
Right.
And they sold the house, gave the dog away. It's a family thing. And off we went.
Okay. And you learned to speak French at a very young age.
Yeah, it was my first. And because adults are slower than children when it comes to languages, and because I'm an only child, so I was always out with my parents and grandparents, and I would be translating with the waiters when I was, 4.
And your parents, were they both Americans?
Yeah, they were both.
Okay.
And so we get to London. I'm put in the French lycée, and the first things that I read were ghost stories. Lady Asquith's third ghost book. It's got fantastic ghost stories in it.
I never heard of it.
And, I'll try and find it for you. And movie scripts. Because there they were all over the house. Dad was producing.
Oh, right.
And so I thought that, okay, when it's in English, it's got a line that goes across the page, and then it's got dialogue in the middle, then another line. But that's not literature. But I find it easier to read in French, actually.
Interesting. And do you get opportunities to speak French very often?
Yeah, well, the great thing is that I'm married to the boy I fell in love with in the French lycée in London when I was 16.
Really?
Who also spent his childhood in France.
So you met this guy when you were 16 in London at the French school. Uh-huh. And then, I happen to know because the internet is filled with stories that you had lots of romantic adventures later on. So I'm guessing you two reconnected later on?
Here
in Rhinecliff.
Yeah.
How long ago?
4 years ago.
And how did that happen?
Things changed in his life. His wife died, and we'd been friends forever. So I knew, and then he was.
And
bereft.
where was he living before here?
London.
Now I just saw this movie last night, Past Lives. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
It's kind of kind of touching on that.
It's, yeah, I think I went to it looking for our story in a certain way, and that wasn't it.
Yeah. But, anyway,
I mean, the thing that's interesting about us, he was taken to France when he was very small because his father ran a theater company. His father came from that kind of, that side of theater that's also social work. It was theater for the factory workers in the central France.
Love it.
It was Peter Brook before Peter Brook. It was hardcore. Miners watching Shakespeare. And my dad...
I want to watch the movie of miners watching Shakespeare.
Yeah, I've seen the photos. It's pretty amazing, and his mother was one of the first directors. But these were very, very serious people who did theater for the people. It wasn't showbiz. It was that essential communication.
Right, this idea that art can illuminate and change. Soothe and change. What fun. So you guys reconnected 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And he moved here from London.
Well, we sort of back and forth a bit, and then there was COVID, and we were separated.
It's an enchanting story. You must be aware of that.
It's a good one.
And have you written about that? I know you've got... I'm holding your memoir here, which was written before
but he's on page 47 and 48.
Oh, he is?
Yeah, but without a name. I was discreet always.
And on 47 and 48, is it a remembrance of this fellow you used to know? Or
Yeah, it was this guy who dumped me when I was 16.
And you never forgave him. But
exactly. I'm making him pay now.
Yeah. Is he enjoying that?
I don't know.
He'll be the next interview. Can he come in next week?
He's very discreet.
And speaking of discretion, so I'm holding your memoir.
Yeah.
The first memoir, maybe.
Yeah.
And it's called The Price of Illusion by Joan Juliet Buck. And I have not yet read it, but but it's amazing. I'm going to read one page from it that is just amazing because it sort of will give people an idea of what it is.
Index.
It's the index. It's like Amos and Andy, Pamela Anderson, Ursula Andress, Anna Karenina, Diane Arbus, Giorgio Armani, Louis Armstrong. It's packed with, as they say, bold-faced names, the whole thing. And that's just, the first page of A's. It's nonstop.
Yeah, but I think the person who did the index was a bit OCD because Louis Armstrong never arrives as a person.
Okay.
What a Wonderful World is the music that I chose from the funeral of the uncle I loved so much.
Okay.
So Louis Armstrong really shouldn't be there.
Well, page 172, 346, and 358.
The music keeps coming back.
Just above Darren Aronofsky.
As I said, Darren Aronofsky. But wait, Louis Armstrong, I said I only remember music if it's hit me at a very emotional time.
Yeah.
So my uncle's funeral, the day I'm sent to rehab because French Vogue wants to get rid of me. And the day I decide I can leave the rehab because one of the little booklets in the little basket in the center of the therapy room opens to the page that says, "What a Wonderful World." So I know I'm allowed to leave.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And so French Vogue, for some reason...
Yeah.
And wanted you out.
Yeah.
Did you ever really get a definitive answer why?
They said, they were not happy when I did the quantum physics issue.
Okay, let's hear about the quantum physics issue, please.
Well, I started big with movies, and the next year, I think was the 75th anniversary, so that was pretty easy, and it was, it was a people pleaser. But I did slightly go off the deep end when I decided that at the dawn of the next millennium, we really had to do the history of science.
Which is huge and beautiful idea.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And it was very well done. But it was seen as an act of hubris.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So if they saw that as an act of hubris, they might be like, all right, you know what, enough. We need to kick her down a few notches.
Yeah, and then there was a plot against me. It's wonderful when people say that because you always think, oh, this poor paranoid person. But in fact, people were taken aside and told, well, she doesn't drink, so you know what she does.
Oh, yeah. And, well, you were on top of the world at that point. I mean, and drugs were everywhere. I mean,
I don't do that either.
Right.
No, it was, something was made up about me.
Oh, and so on this, like, just made up story, they said, all right, you're going to we're going to tell the press you're going to rehab.
Yeah.
That you're off the deep end on drugs and doing this stuff.
If you don't go to rehab, it constitutes quitting. So if you quit, you don't get severance.
Okay. So that must have been kind of a depressing time in your life.
Well, it was kind of, I'd been taking notes and writing all my life.
Right.
So I thought, oh, it's another assignment. And I went with a very big notebook and a new set of, black felt tips.
Right.
And I ran around the rehab, Cottonwood of Arizona, writing. And people would say, would you please not write during the therapy session when somebody else is talking?
I would think it would be frowned upon.
Very, yes.
Yeah.
But I couldn't stop writing and taking notes. I also figured I'd been in Paris for 7 years looking at fashion shows. I hadn't learned anything. I hadn't had what I would call an authentic experience in 7 years. I'd been wearing high heels and looking at fashion shows and going to dinner parties and telling designers, going backstage after the shows and saying, you're a genius. Oh my God, you've understood the way women want to be today. I mean, I was just talking crap the whole time. So I wanted to, find out about reality again.
And so all of a sudden, you said you're in Arizona in rehab.
Yeah.
And were you having then authentic experiences?
Well, at first they tried to throw me out because
of rehab.
Well, yeah, the blood and the pee didn't pass the test.
Oh, geez.
They said you have to leave, and I said no, I've been told I have to be here for 2 months, so let's see how long I'll stay. And the most interesting thing, I did all the easy stuff that people who aren't addicts are given to do. Anger management, Sex Addicts Anonymous, all those things for relatives of alcoholics and addicts.
Right, the codependent stuff.
Yeah, all that codependent. Oh, Melanie, whatever she was called, the something of saying no. Yeah. And then, of course, the people I'd bonded with were the really interesting people who were, of course, the hardcore addicts who said, stop fucking around with this stuff. Come to one of our meetings and you'll see why we're really here, because you're just doing marginal nonsense. So I go with them, and it's a rainy Friday evening, and we're sitting in a circle, and this woman gets up, and she's got long, greasy hair and a pink parka, and she says, I was a poodle groomer and a coke dealer, and I was grooming the pups and doing the coke, and then I realized I couldn't afford the coke, so I had to stop grooming the pups and start dealing the coke. And I jumped up and I went, that's me in Vogue. I couldn't afford to buy the fucking clothes, so I had to become the editor-in-chief.
So you understood, you identified a different kind of addiction.
Completely, yes, that I was addicted actually to Vogue and to appearances.
And to that world.
Yes.
And so was it later on you realized that you had not had a single authentic experience during that time?
No, I knew that. I mean,
okay. I'm just curious, what must that be like to be living in a world where you're aware that your experiences are fake?
Well, my mother died during that time, and I brought my father over to Paris.
Oh, right.
My father, who had brought us over to Paris when I was a baby. And he'd had a lot of success, and then he'd had less success, and then he'd had some really rough years. And by having him in Paris, I was able to create around him the things that he had lost. And that was the most important thing to me.
What a fabulous gift to be able to give to your dad. Yeah, cheers to that. And I say cheers because it's like 5:45 when you brought a drink. We still didn't get to it. I told you this, I could do an 8-hour interview. And it's just zipped by. So what did you bring? What are we about to have?
Well, when I lived in Italy, as I said, I don't really drink. I grew up, everybody drank like crazy.
Yeah.
I was not interested. But when I lived in Italy and we'd go to bars, I would see this big bottle of Chinar
Okay.
that fascinated me because it had a picture of an artichoke on it.
Yeah.
So it's an artichoke-based liqueur.
That sounds horrible.
It is. It's Matt Rosenberg.
Matt's giving two
loves
thumbs
it.
up. Well, I
And-
can't wait to try it.
So I thought that Matt,
Artichoke liqueur.
the sort of talent and invention of Matt Rosenberg would make something for you
He
that might please you.
he is a master mixologist.
He is.
And you're going to join me with us, right?
Well, I'm just going to have like that with a bit of lemon water.
Okay. So it's really sort of a cocktail for cocktail and a half.
Well, yeah, I
alcohol.
mean, it is like 15, what is it, 15% alcohol? So
okay.
it's
so it's sort of
pretty
like
hardcore.
wine strength. 15 or 50?
It's more
Okay.
than wine. It's kind of like,
Right.
it's like sherry. It's desperately sweet.
Oh, wow. I can't wait to try it. So I really can't. Because artichoke liqueur,
It's really good for your liver.
is it?
Yeah.
Now, before we started, you had smelling salts and,
yeah.
and then drops of something.
Yeah.
What were those things?
Okay, the smelling salts are because we've all been breathing God knows what Canadian particles.
Right.
And smelling salts just clear your sinuses before you do any bit of public speaking. They allow you to have a larger range and perhaps deeper resonance.
I wish I'd have heard that before.
Well, why do you think I offered you some?
Well, I tried some.
Yeah, you didn't really. You just sniffed the
I
cap.
sniffed the cap, because you can smell what's in there. But, I'd seen people sniffing it before. And
You want to sniff the
reaction.
cap of Chinar?
No, I'm about to sip the actual cocktail. Well, thank you.
What did you put in his? Okay.
All right. Cheers, Joan Juliet Buck. Thank you for being
Norm.
here. Now, tell the story, if you would be so kind, as to why you are Joan Juliet Buck and not just Joan Buck.
Oh, it's a pretty nice one. So
That is delicious, by the way. Thank you.
It's Matt. Matt made it good.
Matt makes everything good.
Did you give him some of the lemon stuff?
Yeah. Yummy, right? So Joan Juliet, not just Joan Buck.
Yeah. So, my parents knew a lot of journalists because Dad was a producer, and journalists hang around movie people. And when I went to America, I was in love with Tom Wolfe, with the writer Tom Wolfe, but he was busy writing a book, and he never had any time for me. So I actually never saw him once I had come to America.
And you'd come to America. You were the features editor at American.
No. I came to Sarah Lawrence. Having been
okay.
English, French all my life, I thought I should be American. So I went to Sarah Lawrence. It didn't work. I didn't last there very long.
Okay.
Because I wasn't American. I didn't get it. They didn't get me. Anyway, so I started doing the book reviews on Glamour. And the first book that I reviewed was Tom Wolfe's book, this man on whom I had a passionate crush.
Which book?
The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test.
Amazing book.
And so the thing comes out. It's a book review in Glamour magazine next to an ad for Polly Bergen, Oil of the Turtle. You see, I always remember the peripheral shit.
Yeah.
And Gay Talese, the journalist, great friend of my parents, great friend of Tom Wolfe's, calls me up and says, "Congratulations, Joni, you're in print." I said, "Oh, Gay, do you think Tom's seen it?" And he said, "No, why would Tom see it?" I said, "Well, it's a review of his book." He said, "No, it's a comparison shopping thing in New York Magazine about kitty litter." I said, "No." And he said, "Go buy New York Magazine." So I did. And there's this thing, Kitty Litter by Joan Buck. So, and I'm 19 years old. I have climbed the mountain. I'm at the pinnacle. Kitty Litter. So I dial 411 and I ask for Joan Buck. And I'm given a few Joan Bucks. And the first one I call turns out to be the Joan Buck who wrote about kitty litter. So, and she was born 6 years before me. So I was fucked. And I said, "Okay, if you use your middle name, I'll use my middle name." And I never met this woman until I did a talk at the Colony Club 5 years ago when the book came out.
Where's the Colony Club?
It's like some fancy place, New York City,
Uh-huh.
ladies, white marble,
Uh-huh.
resonant halls, leather chairs,
Okay.
gold bits.
And so you did a talk there, set the stage.
And I'm signing the book, and this woman comes up to me and she says, "I'm Joan Buck."
Did she have a middle name? Did she use her middle name as well?
It's Hamilton, and sometimes she used it, and then she went to work for an art gallery. And when my first novel came out in 1982, I got a letter from a guy who said, "Dear Joan, when we came back from Connecticut 6 months ago and you said you were thinking of writing a book, I didn't realize it could go so quickly." Like, no, that must be the other Joan Buck.
It's so fun. So you finally met her
Yeah.
just 5 years ago.
And, what can I say? We didn't bond.
You didn't bond.
No.
Well, that's surprising. Was she still writing about Katie Litter?
No, I think she'd had a pretty good marriage because I think she said she lived on Park Avenue. I imagine she had quite a lot more real estate than I do.
Uh-huh.
I didn't check out her jewelry. I just, I looked away. I let her have her privacy.
Check out her jewelry. And so were you somebody who checked out jewelry prior to working at Vogue? I mean, did you sort of grow up that way?
No, but there were moments. I mean, there were occasions. Like one summer, there was this writer called Irwin Shaw, who was a friend of my parents, who took me on his boat. I was a little older than his son, and Adam and Marion and Irwin Shaw and I went around. Irwin Shaw's boat broke. And so the movie producer, Sam Spiegel, took us on his boat. So suddenly we're on this very grand yacht. And there are two ladies who are models. And I say, "Oh, runway?" I think, "No." "Oh, showroom?" "No." "Photographic?" "No." So they were ladies for hire.
Uh-huh.
And there was no conversation to be had with them. I was 17 years old, and I remember thinking, what do I talk to these women about?
Yeah.
And, "Oh, what a pretty watch. Oh, yes. Do you like it? Oh, I got it in Monte Carlo."
Isn't that funny?
So I realized that talking about jewelry was a really easy way in. And in Barbie, Ken explains in the kind of man thing, Ken at one point is wearing a white fur coat and a great many gold watches. So gold watches are kind of a conversation currency among a certain class.
And I see you were wearing a watch.
I'm wearing a watch that my father gave me when I was 15 that I thought was too small.
Wow. And
It is very small.
It is. It's super small, but it's lovely in its tininess.
It's
And have you worn that the whole time?
no.
No.
But, sometimes you find something in the back of a drawer and you think, doesn't that happen to you?
Yeah, sometimes I kind of wear the same thing every single day.
Right. But then if you reach further back in the drawer, you might find something else.
Sometimes, yeah.
And you go, wow, look at this.
So your drawers are probably packed with swag from fashion shows and stuff. Do you still have?
I got rid of a lot of that because I kind of felt guilty about it,
Right.
I mean, at the beginning of each season, particularly in Italy, not so much in Paris, but certainly in Italy, you'd arrive at your hotel room in Milan and your room would be full of swag.
Right.
Presents from Armani and from every manufacturer of fashion stuff, handbags and scarves, necklaces and stuff.
And are there pieces that you couldn't get rid of that you just loved and that you've kept over those years?
No, what I found out, it's like, it's like you're asking the kid who was allowed to live in the candy shop. And so actually what I found out was that the candy I liked before is the candy I still like. And all that other stuff was just like a kind of tornado of stuff.
Right.
That I actually couldn't wait to get rid of.
I love that. The candy you liked before is the candy you like now.
Yeah, like Missoni. I
like
always liked them.
Like your husband, who you liked before.
I'm very, very consistent. I waited for this guy 57 years.
Oh,
I didn't even know I was waiting for
him. It's a beautiful story. Have you written about that?
No. No, because then that becomes, okay, who am I going to sell this story to and for how much?
That's unfortunate.
That I should think that way?
Well, yeah, I guess. I mean, that's your job, so you do feel that way. But, to the next...
I'm sorry if that sounded like a put down.
No, not at all.
Because, I mean, I've thought of it.
I'm sorry if it sounded like flip.
No, it didn't.
But it's a beautiful and enchanting story.
Yeah, and it's a story
you
that would
must see that. But then also you think, I'd write it. And then, who would I sell it to? So it all of a sudden takes it from this just purely enchanting and romantic place to commerce.
Well, it's also, and I did not mean to sound at all negative about
no,
it, but it's really the way things are now. Like, they really like stories by younger people. Like, well, okay, you're not gonna get a story about a love story that spans 57 years from somebody who's 32.
True.
But publishing is so dismal right now. I mean, many great editors have just been let go from various houses.
Right.
Many agents have begun to, represent influencers or makers of diet cocktails.
Right. Yeah.
And so suddenly the idea, yes, my story is really fantastic. It's a beautiful story. And I've sort of hinted, well, maybe I should do it modern love for the times. And then I started talking to somebody about it. And I thought, Jesus Christ, I am trying to sell the most important story in my life. I'm trying to shill it.
So, yeah, but I mean, that's the job of a writer or memoirist is, shilling your experience. And so here, I guess we've identified the line, no, that's not for sale.
Or maybe it is just, maybe I'm not getting any callbacks.
Could be. The life of a freelancer is tough.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But you do sell a lot of stories. I just read 2 stories that were published in the last week or so.
Yeah. But they're not books. And that's, and that's really fun. This extraordinary thing has happened about the medium. Magazines are, like a bunch of cockroaches on their backs. It's really sad. But social media, everybody's using it in a different way. What happened during COVID, when my beloved was back in London and I was desperately lonely, I started putting my diary on Facebook.
Have you always kept a diary?
Yeah, pretty much. And except when living with, very nosy, horrible man.
Who would sneak into you and read your private...
then it's got to write in code. It's too boring. And then you can't remember where you put it. And
right.
So you just stop. But anyway, so I started putting the diary on Facebook. And then it got picked up by these other entities, like a literary magazine from Berlin, who then anthologized it. And then it got put up for a Pushcart Prize. And so...
Pushcart Prize, which I looked up. It's for short fiction and poetry and stuff. And part of their definition of who they give prizes to is and other literary whatnot.
Yeah, whatnot.
That's right off of their site, whatnot. I'm like, that's charming.
Yeah, it's whatnot. Or tall boy.
Whatnot. Literary whatnot.
I'll be a whatnot. You can be a tall boy.
Okay, thank you. So you're getting...
Okay, so what happens, I realized I love the response when I write on Facebook, because people are saying things and then I get to answer them. So it's like a live something.
Yeah.
That's written, but it's live. So I'm in the Writers Guild because I had to write scripts when I was at Vogue because we didn't have medical insurance. So I had to write movie scripts to have medical insurance. So I wrote 5 movie scripts that never got made. And I'm a member of the WGA, so I'm not writing any scripts that nobody is paying me to write.
Oh, so you've kept up your membership. You're still a member of the WGA.
I'm sort of semi-dormant. Then when I came back to America after French Vogue, I started writing plays and they weren't very good. And somebody suggested that I try working with performers, which led to me somehow going back on stage as an actress, and then led to me actually acting and being in a few things.
Yeah.
So I've got my SAG card. So
you do. So you're on double strike.
So I'm on double strike. So I wrote about the strike, but I actually wrote about the structure of the strike and the way there's somebody in one of the studios said, we want it to drag on until they can't pay their rent and they can't pay their mortgages.
Right.
And as we know, actors are being replaced by AI. And already CGI is kind of, has been altering a lot of things, but AI could be the death. We could be at a moment of absolutely radical, horrific change for everything that is human expression.
Right.
And so I wrote this little thing just because I wrote it, because that's how I felt. That's the great thing. You don't have to sell it. You just write it. And somebody contacted me from Smerconish. Do you know about Smerconish?
Mm-mm.
So Smerconish is a guy who's on CNN, but he also has a website. And this is like information, news and views from both sides. And so they reprinted it. And I think it's been like on the first page of their website for the last week. So there's no money changing hands, but there is actually a lot of communication going on.
Right.
About important stuff. Because what I say about the strikes on Smerconish is actually stronger than anything I'd be able to write in a magazine.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And what you say about the strike is not just sort of the dangers of AI, but this like absurd where we've gotten to in this capitalist society where the studio heads are making $300 million a year or whatever.
Yeah,
and the typical writer is making $60,000 a year.
Yes.
If they're lucky, that's like the median.
Yeah. And it used to be that there was this incentive to write scripts. I mean, Scott Fitzgerald, Faulkner, everybody went out to Hollywood because you would sort of more or less eke out a living and get enough, to pay for your whiskey by doing your books. But then you went to Hollywood and you made all this money.
Right.
And the trade-off was, okay, you're going to be treated like shit by jerks, but you're going to earn a shitload of money.
Right.
And now I began to hear about it, say 10, 12 years ago. Somebody who'd been a script doctor earning a lot of money for doctoring scripts was talking about how the script doctoring jobs were now come in for a day and we'll pay you $5,000. That's,
Yeah, you can't.
That does not pay for the mansion. So the whole idea, as you said, it's about capitalism.
Right.
Because the idea of capitalism is everybody can get rich. And
yeah.
But the truth of it is, no.
That truth's becoming less and less of a truth. I mean, it's less and less possible as, over the last 40 years. I remember thinking of Reagan busting the air traffic controllers.
Remember that? Remember did you get on a plane when you were too young, right?
I might have, but no, I lived with my parents. But, it's been 40 years of wealth just moving up, just floating up to the top
and making a giant hole between the aspirants and the people who've got it.
Yeah.
Used to be able to fake it, kind of.
Well, you used to be able to, like a family, a single worker could support a family with one parent staying at home, sort of doing the other work, the important work of making a home and raising children and stuff like that. And that's just not possible anymore. So, and you touch on that in this article.
Mm-hmm. I'm angry in this article.
Yeah. And so you've probably, I'm guessing in most of your other articles, you felt you didn't have that freedom to be as angry?
Well, I mean, I can do what I want on Facebook. Thank you, Mark Zuckerberg. How ironic is that? Any magazine that you write for has its identity that it wants you to kind of fit yourself to. And actually, any publication that pays you is going to want some kind of mimicry on your part.
Right.
Unless it is, a literary magazine that wants you because you are truly, authentically your own voice. But it's difficult to develop your own voice if you're writing for the magazines that want the mimicry.
Right. And so how would you describe your voice?
I think it's gotten a lot stronger since I've been out in the wilds.
Out in the wilds.
Yeah.
Post Vogue and sort of internet.
Yeah, and exactly.
Right. That's just great. But so it's gotten a lot stronger. And what else? What other? Go on. Use some adjectives.
Oh no,
It'll
I
be
can't.
fine.
I can't do that because if I say it, really is that thing. I remember once trying to interview Robert De Niro and being very sort of, so what's your approach? And he was like contorting himself. I can't discuss this. I gotta work. I can't talk about this. And
Is that how you're feeling right now?
yeah, I'm feeling, I don't know, because it's wonderful to have so much attention paid to one for such a long time. But it also kind of empties the well.
It does. For you, like talking
Yeah.
about yourself,
Don't
all
you
this
feel
attention.
that? I mean, look, you perform, you do stuff. First time I saw you were talking about pornography at Morgan.
Yeah. I'm turning that into a 4-part docuseries,
Wow.
which is very interesting. Yeah. It's
Wow.
called 30,000 Years of Pornography.
Wow. Oh, God, you have those. I got a lot of
And it's
Pompeian
on
postcards if you need them.
Everything. Oh, sure. Pompeii. Forget about it.
Oh, it's fantastic.
And because Vesuvius, is that what was there? Like preserved all these frescoes.
Fabulous paintings, yes.
Really triple X rated frescoes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, well, they had the whorehouses, they had the bars, they had the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And Herculaneum.
It's even better. Have you been there?
No.
So cool.
I would love to go. So you've been there, I'm guessing.
Oh, God, yeah.
And have you traveled a bunch in your life? I'm guessing you've traveled just about everywhere.
No, I went to Sydney once, but otherwise I've sort of been confined to Europe.
Uh-huh. And where do you want to go next?
I'm really happy in Rhinecliff.
It's a wonderful place.
It is a place that I felt like I was discovering when my friend who lives up here said, "Oh, I should show you this funny Rhinecliff place," and there was a little sign that said "for rent" in front of this little blue house, and my friend and I met the owner at the Dunkin' Donuts in Hyde Park, and
Right.
she wrote the check because I'd come away without a checkbook, and since Radio Free Rhinecliff started, it's funny what's happened here because with the demographic changed from older, let's say people who tend to speak in the past tense, to people who've just left Brooklyn during COVID.
Right.
And then in the middle of that, in 2021, Matt, who's one of the earliest adopters, you've been here since the 90s? 2001. Before September 11 or after? Okay, right. Prescient. It suddenly has a reason to be, not just to soothe your battered soul, but an actual reason to be, a place of connection, a place of growth, a place of stimulus.
It's such an amazingly special place. And so you said, I'm opening your book now, your beautiful memoir, The Price of Illusion. And in there you said, in the preface, the prologue, you say that you felt that you didn't belong anywhere.
Yeah.
You said, I quote, "My entire life had been one easy exile after another, but I'd lived in too many places to belong anywhere." Do you feel finally that you do belong somewhere?
When I'm not in Rhinecliff, I can't wait to get back.
Right.
And last year, Nick and I spent 7 months in London because he had things to do with his house. And I wasn't sure how he would feel about coming back here.
Right.
And he was even more eager than I was.
I love that. I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yes, it is yes.
And on that, I'm going to sign off. Joan
Thank you
Juliet
for
Buck,
having me. This has been truly wonderful.
so amazing. I have like 12 pages of notes. I didn't get to any of them.
Don't worry.
Would you be so kind as to come back and sit at that microphone again someday?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, that'd be so
Absolutely.
delightful. Thank you,
We
Joan
can do
Juliet Buck.
themes. We can do movies, music, 75 years of
Not
Radio
doing
Free
the
Rhinecliff.
science thing.
Yeah, no quantum physics.
Yeah.
Promise.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, people, for
Thank you.
tuning in.
Thank you
Have
for
a great
having me.
day, whatever day it is.
Have a great weekend. you.